Live, organised by Wales Online. I'm Martin Shipton, the Chief Reporter of Wales Online and the Western Mail. And with me today to discuss the impending Scottish referendum on independence and its implications for Wales are a number of experts and politicians. We have with us David Melding, who is the Deputy Presiding Officer for the National Assembly and the Conservative AM for South Wales Central. We have David Williamson, who is our very own political editor based in Westminster. We have Eluned Parrott, who is the Liberal Democrat Assembly member for South Wales Central. We have Graham Henry, who is our Senedd correspondent. We have Rhyn ap Iorwerth, who is the Assembly member for Ynys Môn, representing Plaid Cymru. We have Vaughan Gething, who is the Assembly member for Cardiff South and Penarth, as well as being the Deputy Minister for Health. We have Clay Williams of the Wales Governance Centre, which is attached to Cardiff University. And there is myself. So what I will do initially is ask the members of the panel whether they think in the aftermath of what happens on Thursday there is the need for an independence referendum in Wales, and if not, how they see things going forward. So David Melding, if I could ask you what your position on this would be.
Well, obviously, if there is a yes vote, there will be a need for very deep constitutional discussions with the rest of the United Kingdom, which would mostly affect us. But we would also be affected by whatever negotiations take place then with the about to be independent Scottish state. But for a Welsh referendum on independence, if we follow the Scottish precedents, you'd need a political party to campaign for that in an assembly election, win a majority of seats, or at least a coalition that had that aspiration win a majority of seats, to hold a referendum, and then an appropriate negotiation with Westminster, and then a referendum would be triggered. I certainly don't think that under those circumstances the Welsh people would have less sovereign rights to hold a referendum than the Scottish people did.
Okay, thanks very much, David. What I will do now is move over to Rhyn ap Iorwerth, who is representing Plaid Cymru. And David there referred to the fact that to trigger a referendum with a view to having Welsh independence would depend on a political party winning the majority in an assembly election. And essentially the only political party that would be prepared to do that, I think, would be Plaid Cymru. What's your position on the question of a referendum on Welsh independence, Rhyn? I mean, do you think we're in the same position in Wales as the Scots are, or are we in a rather different position?
I mean, David spells out the procedure very, very well there, and you're quite right in saying that there's just one party who would want to put that on the table at this point in time. But of course, a consensus might grow in years to come. You don't know what might happen after a yes vote in the referendum on Thursday. It's absolutely the case that the people of Wales would be sovereign in that position, in the same way as the people of Scotland are sovereign in being asked to decide on their future this Thursday. I believe that Wales will only be able to flourish properly by having full control of all the levers of taxation, all the levers of the economy, and so on. But of course, it will need us to put that case to people, and for people to see that there is an alternative to the current status quo. What's happened in Scotland, of course, is that there has been a political awakening driven by a party that achieved power. Most people thought it could never happen, but the SNP did achieve power in order to be able to put this question to the people of Scotland, and they have seen now, over 2 years of debate, no snap decisions, but 2 years of debate, that there is an alternative. Which way they'll go is too close to call. I think most of us would probably agree that on that point with 3 days to go, but there is a debate in Scotland on an alternative, and I'm sure that there will be that debate in Wales too one day.
Vaughan Gething, where does Welsh Labour, which is obviously the party of government in Wales, stand on the issue of Welsh independence and the prospect of some kind of referendum on that? And indeed, to widen the question to you a bit further, do you think that in the aftermath of the referendum in Scotland on Thursday, there will be the need for any kind of referendum at all in Wales?
No, is the short answer. And I think it's important to go back to the question that you've asked, Mark, and that was about should there be a referendum following the vote in Scotland on Thursday? And the biggest barrier to that happening is the people of Wales, because on any form of sampling of opinion in a survey, or come election time for Westminster local government or the Assembly election, there has never been anything approaching a majority agreement, and there's never been anything approaching even a fifth of the people of Wales who would vote for pro-independence parties. And when we look at what will happen after Thursday, we need to wait until we get to the position of having the results on Thursday. Whether it's a yes or a no vote will help in what direction the conversation goes. But I, for a long time, and again this is Welsh Labour's view, is that we think there should be a sensible, grown-up conversation about what we want the union to look like. I believe in devolution, but I do believe at some point there should be a settlement, a settled view on the share of powers between the devolved nations of the union, what's retained at Westminster, and the biggest challenge in all of this is getting England to engage in its own future, and to get a view that really does look at the whole of the UK, because unless we do that in a settled and sensible, grown-up way, with all parts of the union contributing, then I think we're likely to have a period of instability. So I certainly believe we could, should, and will end up with more devolution here in Wales, but I'd rather that wasn't on a persistent piecemeal policy, but I'd like to see a proper settlement that all of us can sign up to. And I don't think in that sense we're that far away from the Liberal Democrats, and to be fair, it's probably not too far away from David's view of the constitutional future, although we'd all have different views about how that power should be exercised. I think it's one of the tricks of the Scottish referendum is trying to present it as Scotland against the court. And I don't think that's a very sensible way to try and map out the future of an individual country, let alone the whole union.
Thanks very much, Vaughan. Eluned Parrott, Liberal Democrats. I'm just wondering what your view is on the question of a referendum, and also I was at a conference the other day which was looking at the way forward for Wales, and your leader Kirsty Williams was there, who was making the point that Wales really has to stand up for itself in terms of expressing a view about what it actually wants. And I think the position of the Liberal Democrats is that you want to go forward with the recommendations of the Silk Commission, which is for a number of extra powers for the National Assembly. First of all, Eluned, what is your position on the question of an independence referendum in Wales? And then if you could perhaps outline your party's position on the way forward.
I don't think that there is an appetite for there to be an independence referendum here in Wales. If you look at the polling, for example, even among Plaid Cymru's own voters, fewer than half say they would vote for full independence for Wales. So that's not really a basis on which you'd want to trigger the process of a referendum discussion over our future. But we do need to work together very, very strongly to make sure that that the voice of Wales is consistent and coherent, and we do need to, I think, back up the recommendations of the Silk Commission. We put together the Silk Commission to make sure that there was a cross-party consensus or a cross-party input into the discussion about what Wales's powers might look like in the future. And for that reason, I think that we need to back up the Silk Commission and be very strong and be very united as a group of political parties when we are negotiating for Wales's benefit with the rest of the United Kingdom. Regardless of the vote on Thursday, that conversation needs to be had, that discussion about the relationship between the constituent parts of the United Kingdom, that needs to be had. And from my point of view, as I say, we've already done a lot of work as to what that future might look like in terms of powers for Wales. Why would we not back up the work we've already done together as four political parties?
Thank you very much, Leonard. If I could bring in Clay Williams from the Wales Governance Centre at Cardiff University. Clay, what do you think the impact of the Scottish referendum on Thursday, whatever it may be, in terms of a result, will be for Wales? I mean, do you think that there's going to be, if there were, for example, a yes vote in Scotland, would that increase the appetite in Wales for Welsh independence? And what other factors do you think are involved in this debate?
I think there are a couple of things going forward. Firstly, we don't actually know what the impact of the referendum will be because we simply haven't been in this position before as Wales as a country, and for the rest of the UK since Ireland left in 1922. But if you look at the YouGov poll that came out this morning, which is a joint poll between us and ITV Wales, it showed the support for Welsh independence is already up to 17%, up from around 12% previously. And that is quite, it's only a couple of percentage points, but it might give you an indication as to where support for Welsh independence might go if there was an independent Scotland come Friday morning. But I think on the whole, if there's a yes vote, I don't think things will change that quickly and that dramatic in Wales, because Wales's devolution settlement at the moment is kind of linked to the Silk Commission recommendations, and we haven't really heard anything beyond that from any of the political parties in Wales. We've heard this talk of this constitutional convention. We haven't been given that much detail what this constitutional convention would look like, what it would look to achieve. So at the moment we're looking at the recommendations on that. In terms of the no vote, I think the no vote is actually possibly where it could be quite dangerous for Wales, because we've already got what's called an asymmetrical devolution settlement, which basically means that the devolution settlement in Wales is quite it's not equal across the UK, and in turn that means we know that Wales has got less powers than Northern Ireland and Scotland, for instance. Well, if Scotland votes no on Thursday and ends up in a debate with the UK government over further powers of Scotland, where again does that leave Wales and Northern Ireland? We simply don't know. So when calls have been made for Wales to be part of those discussions, I think they're fair calls to make, but we need to ensure that Wales are a part of those discussions.
Thanks very much indeed, Clay. I'll now bring in our political editor from Westminster, David Williamson. David, what have you been picking up from MPs at Westminster about the Scottish referendum on Thursday? Is the degree of nervousness there, and how do you see things playing out in the event of either a yes vote or a no vote?
I think the general recognition is that it's going to absolutely hinge on the people who are undecided at the moment. One person was comparing the tactics which he used, for example, in Irish referendums, where regularly it's the don't knows who are targeted, with the argument, if you don't know, vote no. So certainly the no campaign will be pinning a lot of its hopes on that. I think there is a sense of it's almost like one of these towns in the Wild West where the train only comes through once a month, and for 2 years we've seen this locomotive coming, and it's almost like this shock and wild panic which has seized the establishment. Wednesday's Prime Minister's questions was just extraordinary, because you had a session of PMQs without a PM and without a leader of the opposition and a deputy Prime Minister, because they were all gone. And I think for people in Wales and people in Scotland, there's a sense of, well, what did you spend the last 2 years thinking and doing? Because this has been such an inevitable thing. And one of the interesting possibilities that could have been would have been to put so-called Devo Max on the ballot paper. In that case, we probably wouldn't be talking about the real possibility of independence in a couple of days' time in the vote. We'd be talking about how Wales needs to negotiate a settlement that will protect its interests. So I think there's a great sense of how the SNP have been able to think about this all their lives and to plan for this. And at the same time, you have a Westminster which is very much focused on both international crises, but also the politics of the next 5 minutes. And you can't fight a campaign, and you can't also think about the constitutional future of a country when your eye is on 1,000 other balls. So, yeah, there's been a sudden focusing of minds, and I think a lot of panic station alarm bells ringing.
Thanks very much, David. Graham Henry, Senate correspondent down at Cardiff Bay. What has the mood been like amongst Assembly members, would you say, as the referendum approaches in Scotland, and how do you think things will pan out afterwards, regardless of the result?
I think there has been a general greater recognition in Cardiff Bay about the significance of the referendum and about how close it could be. Assembly members have been off for some time, so they haven't actually been around to register their shock at the polls closing at the last minute. But I think there has been a general recognition that it may well be close, more so than in Westminster. I think there's also been a sense of frustration, I guess, that there hasn't been a great deal of recognition about Wales's place in all of this. I think there's been a recognition about how many powers Scotland has, how many powers it should accrue in this process, but Wales and England particularly, England a big question in this, about how many powers should come to England, how that should be done, how many powers should come to Wales. I mean, with Carwyn Jones, he made this call for a constitutional convention, I think back in January 2012, and now within the last sort of 2 weeks of the campaign coming to a head, this has become the in-fashion thing to be calling for, a constitutional convention for the whole of the UK. And I think there's been quite a few people, certainly within the Cardiff Bay bubble, that have been expressing a sense of frustration that this hasn't been thought of in the 2.5 years that they've had to think about it. And that there hasn't been a sort of an end game for Wales or for England and Northern Ireland to be part of this. If there has been a failing, I guess, of the No campaign, it's to not think of the big picture and perhaps down to a sense of complacency about the lead that they had.
Thanks very much, Graham. What I wanted to do actually was to slightly focus on the situation about any kind of referendum in Wales after what happens on Thursday. Now, of course, the position of the Labour Party has been that it thinks that if there were to be any question of devolving income tax on that. I wanted to ask Vaughan whether, in view of what happened last week, where perhaps as a result of some panic because the race in Scotland was getting tighter, there was a package of proposals that was put to Scotland, and effectively people in Scotland are now being told that if they vote no, they're voting for Devo Max. And there's no question of there being another referendum in relation to these extra fiscal powers which Scotland will be offered. So in that context, why is there the need, does Vaughan think, for there to be a referendum in Wales on the devolution of income tax powers?
Well, they're two very different situations again, Martin. If you look at what's happening in Scotland, you're going to have all of the union parties going into a general election with similar pledges around the devolution of powers to the Scottish Parliament. There's a settled view, and people will get to judge that in elections to the UK Parliament and to the Scottish Parliament election the year afterwards. When you look at the situation here in Wales, again, part of the challenge around income tax powers is the whole package around funding. And if you don't resolve the funding position, then actually income tax powers could be a trap. If you look at the Scottish Parliament, its current tax varying powers, they've never used them. And there's a good reason for that, because of the way it affects the funding formula and where they want to be seen to be competing on that level with other parts of the UK. It's again part of the reason why having, call it a constitutional convention, call it what you like, but a sensible grown-up conversation about what the union should look like. And I think that's in the interest of all parties of the union, to understand what powers we want to exercise in Wales, what powers we want to exercise at a UK level, and to be part of a conversation about what should happen in the rest of the UK. And I don't think that really changes the position we're in now. And I don't think that's a million miles away from where people are in Wales. For all of the interest in the Scottish referenda, when I go and knock doors here, this isn't the #1 topic people are interested in. It doesn't really get very close. People have rather more everyday concern. That comes back to my view again, that the devolution of power must be power for a purpose. And it's how we exercise that power, how people due us as we exercise that power, but I think it makes a really big difference what we could and should do. But there's no problem, I think, in having a parallel conversation of what the settlement should be, and at the same time having a disagreement and argument, as we should do in a healthy democracy, around how those powers should be exercised. Just to pursue the point with you a little further, Vaughan, Carwyn Jones has made it clear that he would not support the devolution of income tax varying powers unless there was fair funding for Wales, which essentially means making up the shortfall which was identified by the Holtham Commission a few years ago, which is that Wales is missing out on a needs basis by about £300 million a year. Now, Ed Miliband, who may next May become the Prime Minister, has hinted that there may be the possibility of satisfying Welsh demands in respect of fair funding. If that happens, and if Wales got the £300 million or whatever it is a year that it requires, would you all be in favour of the devolution of income tax powers to Wales? Well, again, I'd want to see it as being as part of a package around what devolution looks like. So I think having referenda on single issues, I don't think it really enthuses the public. If you look at the if you look at the lawmaking powers referendum we had, there was a very clear majority, but a very poor turnout. And I'd like to see a question that rather more fully engages what should the union look like. And I'd expect income tax powers and funding to be part of that whole package. But I do think even if you had a referendum just on that question of the funding package and income tax varying powers, you'd likely to see a greater turnout and engagement in that, because people understand that directly affects what the institution could do and how it would directly affect their own lives and livelihoods, whether they're employees or business owners or not employed. Now, I think that's the sort of conversation we should have in a full package. And despite your charming quest that I go beyond party policy at this point, I still think that's a sensible position for my party to be in. And I really think that represents the view of the great majority of people in Wales. And again, I think that goes across party preference as well. I think lots of supporters of other parties, including quite some supporters, would want to see a full package on offer. Like, what does all of this mean, rather than asking something on this narrow question. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Vaughan. Rena Pureworth, picking up on the point about what should happen after this referendum, and let's just for a moment imagine that there is a no vote, and therefore this package that Gordon Brown rather incongruously announced last week from the UK government that would be offered to Scotland without a further referendum. Do you think that a similar package should be offered to Wales, and if so, should we accept it? Should there be a referendum?
It's worth going back and just giving a little bit of context, perhaps, to this remarkable announcement that was made by the leaders of the UK political parties last week. We heard mentioned earlier that, had Devo Max been on the menu, perhaps Scotland would have gone for that. The reason the UK establishment, David Cameron in particular, didn't want Devo Max to be an option was he wanted it to be a straight fight between yes and no, because he didn't think that yes would be in with a whisker of a shout. Now, we now know that it's on a knife edge and it could be yes. So that was a big mistake that was made by the British establishment that just assumed that Scotland would very, very comfortably vote no. So that's the background. So when these promises are made in panic at the 11th hour, people see them for what they are. Let's also, for a little bit of context, remind everybody that there has been not a convention, but a commission, a Silk Commission, looking at the option for what's best for Wales in years going forward. What happened in Wales after the Silk Commission made its recommendations? We had the unionist parties, Labour, we had the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats, cherry picking. We'll take a bit of this, we'll take a bit of that. We won't take a look at the package that has been carefully considered by Silk. We'll just look at what we think might be right. And here we have Vaughan Gething say, actually, no, we do need to take a wider look. Listen, we've got to be clear about the need for Wales to set the lead on where we go next. It's clear that the devolution settlement as it is isn't working. If you look at tax-raising powers, your community council's got some tax-raising powers. Your council needs tax-raising. Your local council rather has tax-raising powers. You know, the assembly obviously should have tax-raising powers. Tax-varying powers, call them what you like. But the way that it's being put forward now, this lockstep where you've got to change all the tax rates by the same amount, totally unusable. You know, there's no point having a referendum on it because they wouldn't be usable. I think now we look for the consensus, we learn from what's happened in Scotland and the fact that we need everybody to work together on this. Not to try to pull the wool over people's eyes, as people did with the Silk Commission, and by offering these powers to Scotland at the last minute. We've got to look at things in detail. Moving forward to, yes, why not an independence referendum in Wales in years to come? But that's not where we are now. What we need to focus on is giving Wales the right tools and having the debate in Wales. That's what's happened in Scotland. They've had a mature debate. People have looked at the options. And already in Wales, we see signs of people trying to say, this can never, ever, ever happen in Wales. Let's close that bit of the debate down now. Well, it might. You don't know what consensus might come in years to come. And Vaughan says, you know, you've never had a party in Wales with even close to a fifth of the population supporting a party that wanted independence. Well, that's not true, is it, Vaughan? Because, you know, you go back to 99 and you know, Plaid Cymru and Labour close to being on parity. People's opinions change in time. And this is a particular issue where Scotland's changed its opinion, Wales can too.
Thanks, Reen. David Melding, as well as being a Conservative and a Unionist, you are, as we said at the outset, a Federalist. Now, how, in the aftermath of this referendum that's taking place in Scotland, do you see things panning out in terms of getting to a position where Wales could be part of a federal UK?
Well, I think if we get a no vote, we need to take decisive action about rebuilding the union and having a new union, because whatever's happened in this whole debate, I think there's been far too much concentration on defending the old union and not projecting what a new union could achieve. And basically, we need a federal package, and point one of that would be a recognition that sovereignty now exists in spheres. There'd be the Scottish sphere, the Welsh sphere, Northern Ireland, and by implication English sphere, and also the sphere of sovereignty for the United Kingdom. And that can be done very quickly, and in effect it's already been done, because you'd hardly have a referendum on independence if you didn't think sovereignty resides with the peoples of the home nations, at least to some extent. So on that ultimate question, it seems that we already accept the principle, and I don't think you're going to need a referendum on that particularly. I think we could just accept reality. The second stage is really having a tidy package of fairly extensive federal powers for Scotland in the first instance. And I won't bore you with the package I would recommend, but I mean, it will take some careful negotiation, and it shouldn't be rushed into. I think it's fine to say that it will be extensive and will alter fundamentally current arrangements, but it will need very careful negotiation. And I think that it probably is best done alongside some form of constitutional convention. And there are many ways of doing this. You know, Men in Philadelphia is one model, but it's 2.5 centuries old now. The Irish and Icelandic models, the more recent ones, they've been used in many places. But I think what would probably happen is the package for Scotland would emerge first. And at that point, all you need to say is that England, Northern Ireland and Wales would have the right to those powers should they ever request them. And then you just allow the peoples of those other home nations to make their own decisions on how strong and robust and federal they want their domestic institutions to be. And for most of those big questions, you probably are going to need some form of referendum process. I think moving to tax powers would require that, because a referendum was held in Scotland on tax powers. Incidentally, when that was held, it was thought to be on a knife edge. It ended up, a 2/3 vote in favour of tax powers. So I wouldn't assume that a referendum on tax powers is going to be that difficult to win in the transformed environment we will be in. But I think those that poo-poo federalist arrangements really don't understand them, or how extensive they're used and how often they're used in English-speaking countries that have parliamentary systems of government. So it could certainly work in Britain if we have the will to preserve the British state. I am a great optimist. We can have asymmetry within a federal state. That's not a problem. What you can't really have is exceptionalism. To say that only the people of Scotland could have certain powers without any question of the other home nations sharing those powers if they wish, I think that level of exceptionalism would be damaging to the state, because it would be a form of semi-independence in effect. So we need to avoid that. But you don't have to have the same powers in all domestic institutions. It's up to the English to decide what sort of arrangements they want in England, whether they want one English Parliament, whether they want to do their English legislation at Westminster, whether they would want to see a move to city regions with federal powers, and all those things are possible. And it's up to the peoples of each home nation to decide their domestic arrangements. And we could have a federal system that's quite varied, but as I said, it wouldn't be exceptional. No one would have the right to more powers than any other part of the federal state, but that doesn't mean to say all parts of the state would take their full quantity of powers that would be available to them.
Thanks very much, David. Leonard Parrott, of course, the Liberal Democrats are and have been for many years a federal party. What's your vision of federalism in a post-Scottish referendum scenario?
I do think that there needs to be a conversation about that with the constituent parts of the UK, because what you wouldn't wish to do is impose a single model of federalism from a centre. So I have a lot of sympathy with what David is saying, that there has to be the opportunity for equality, but the settlement that each individual constituent part of the UK chooses ought to be in its own hands and in the hands of the people of those places. What I think is difficult or is completely unacceptable to me is the idea that some parts of the union would have a right to more self-determination than other places. Apologies, something just popped up on my screen there. So what we need to have is the opportunity for equality, but what we also need to have is the opportunity as well to start inspiring conversations within our own places. Now, Reen talked about the idea of being able to inspire a wider conversation with an independence debate. And yes, it has inspired a wider conversation, but it hasn't necessarily been a very positive conversation. What I would like to see is the kind of conversation within Wales, not about in or out or separate or together. What I'd like to see is a conversation about how can we work Wales, how can we develop a Wales that is going to be stronger, that's going to have a renegotiated partnership with the rest of the UK. Because it's logical to me that as part of the family of nations that is the UK, as part of the family of nations that is the European Union, that we have a settled idea of what our constitution is, but that it is, but as I say, that the opportunity that we have here is to renegotiate the respect that we hold one another in, and also the relationship we have between each other without having partners which are stronger than one another.
Thanks. Clay Williams, what do you see about a federal system, in a federal system, whatever the result of this referendum on Thursday? Because we do have a very unbalanced union, don't we? I mean, England is the dominating country. Is it possible to have a workable federation in a system where one element of the federation is so dominant?
Anything's possible, Martin. But I think one of the biggest thing after this referendum is what you do with England. England is such a big unit, as you've noted, within any kind of future federation. What we do know in England, there is no appetite for regionalism. We do know that there is an increasing demand for England to be recognised within the Union. We do know that there's an increasing English antagonism towards the other devolved nations. Some research that came out of the Wales Government Centre a couple of weeks ago showed that 60% of people in England wanted a hard line taken with Scotland, whatever the outcome of the referendum. We have to ask the question: what is fueling that? We know that there is demand for devolution in England, and we have to, and any kind of post-independence referendum discussions have to recognise that. In terms of whether it could work, I'm not entirely sure, because simply because of the sheer size of England as a unit at the moment. But what we are seeing in England as well is what they're calling the combined city regions, or the combined regions, where our multiple councils are coming together now to lobby Westminster for further devolution of fiscal powers. But when they want tax-bearing powers in order to be able to compete on a grander scale with, let's say, for instance, Scotland and London. But when you ask them then whether they want powers over policy areas and legislative powers, they put their hands up and go, no, we're not interested in any of that. So there's a lot of these kind of questions that need to be nitpicked if we are going to have any kind of discussion over the future over federal future. And the two things are England and funding. We already see that English regions are underfunded through Barnett, as is Wales, and then we see the parties of the No campaign all going cap in hand to Scotland, saying we'll protect Barnett. Well, in the event of a no vote. So what's going to happen after a no vote if Barnett is protected in this current format? Well, all these questions are up in the air. And, I welcome the suggestions that we made by the politicians on the table that we need to have a mature debate around this. But these are some key questions that really need to be asked, and they need to be asked very quickly. If any form of timetable that Gordon Brown has put forward, the timetable I think is a bit unrealistic, because it does mean that you'll have to clear other things on the legislative timetable in Westminster. But at the same time, these are big questions that do need to be asked.
Thanks. David Williamson, you work in Westminster, you talk to lots of MPs. Is it your sense that the idea of having a federal Britain is one that is close to their hearts, or one that they even consider? I mean, isn't it the case that English MPs, to a large extent, and to an increasing extent perhaps, take the view that it's England and their particular part of it that matters, and they're not actually too bothered about what happens in Scotland and Wales. What they're anxious to do is to establish greater power for England, and many of them are now coming out in favour of an English Parliament.
Yeah, I think certainly that's been the case until very, very recently. When you look at the torrent of reports that comes out of select committees and indeed out of party press machines, it really illustrates the lack of thinking about Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland and the effects that happen. And in a way, when you're looking at a population of England of 53 million, you can understand why it's not been at the top of the agenda. But in the last 2 years, there has been a growing body of people who are starting to actually think, well, hang on, we actually have a voice here as well. And a lot of that's coming from the English regions. The rhetoric that you hear from Vince Cable and David Cameron about the need to rebalance the economy, that chimes with Wales, and it chimes with Scotland and Northern Ireland. It also chimes with Yorkshire, the Midlands, the Northwest, everywhere around there. And one of the things that hasn't got much publicity is the concept of city deals, which is being pushed out. And it'll be interesting to see if after 2015, if there's only one party in government, whether there's this momentum behind this. But basically, it took the idea of, as well as giving a measure of financial devolution, it would actually allow cities, for example, to have greater say over the way in which welfare is actually provided through job centres, through employment and support allowances, that type of thing. So what you could be looking at, without great fanfare, is certain English regions starting to have greater control over the way the welfare system works than Wales has, for example, over how welfare is there. So then suddenly it truly is an asymmetrical union. And certainly in places like Liverpool, where you've got an elected mayor called Joe Anderson, he doesn't have anything like the profile, for example, of Boris Johnson on a national scale. But gradually, just as in the way it took the Assembly a period of bedding down, English cities are developing a great appetite, and English regions, for greater autonomy. And once that conversation starts going, and once you have very ambitious local figures running with those ideas and those proposals, that's going to be quite fascinating. And I mean, I think just one other question, which is really up in the air at the moment, is that if there's a no vote and this constitutional convention takes part, are we going to actually see the SNP joining in that discussion, or will relations be too fraught after that? Will this essentially be the Unionist parties having that discussion? And it'll be interesting to see what stance Plaid decides to take in that as well. The other question is, if there is a yes vote, what happens to the Scottish MPs who've been campaigning so vociferously? Will they be able to sit down with the SNP colleagues suddenly and try and negotiate the best deal for Scotland? These are huge questions which throw the lead up to both the 2015 election and the 2016 elections into a whole level of uncertainty.
Thanks, David. I wanted to really ask the panel now whether they think there are dangers for Wales as a consequence of what happens in Scotland, because if there is a yes vote, then Wales will be a very small minority, residual UK, and there could be, I mean, it has been argued, and I have read material suggesting that there could be an appetite within England, essentially, to say, well, let Wales get on with it, and we're not prepared to subsidise them anymore, because for all of the arguments that are put forward in the wake of the Holtham Commission about the fact that the Assembly is underfunded, many English MPs do not see it that way. They look at the amount of public money that is spent in Wales, and they compare it with what is spent in England, and they see that more is spent in Wales. So are there dangers for Wales? Breen, what do you think?
It's a question that's been asked a lot over the past weeks and months. What I see with the yes vote is a real opportunity for the kind of political awakening to happen in Wales that's happened in Scotland. We've got to talk in practical terms. So what does it mean? Well, there'll be a huge amount of pressure on political leaders in Wales to put the Welsh case. And there'll be a huge amount of pressure then on the UK Parliament, or the rest of the UK, depends on which way it goes, to prove to us in Wales that we are indeed better together as part of UK or the rest of the UK. I think there's a direction where we need to be going immediately, I think. We need to be moving towards a reserve powers model. We need to assume that everything is devolved to Wales, unless it's specifically earmarked for reserving to Westminster. We need tax-raising powers, including but not exclusively income tax. That's got to come together with a new funding model for Wales. That's going to be argued by political leaders in Wales, including Plaid Cymru, including the Welsh Government, but it's also got to be looked at constructively by the government in London. Because, as I say, if they're to say to us moving forward that we are better together, they are going to have to prove it to Wales too, in the same way as they are in panic at the 11th hour in Scotland trying to prove it to the people of Scotland. If the UK government turned round to us after, say, a no vote or a yes vote in spite and tried to turn fire on Wales in some way because of the actions of the people of Scotland, well, that way Wales and government in London. So it'll be a challenge. Of course it'll be a challenge, but I really see a yes vote as an opportunity for Wales.
Thanks, Reen. David Melding, you're regarded as a benevolent kind of Conservative, and obviously you're a Welsh Conservative. You're very committed to getting the best deal possible for Wales, but some of your party colleagues in England perhaps are not as well disposed towards Wales as you are. Do you think there are dangers ahead for Wales?
Well, I think whatever happens on the 18th, we will need generous hearts on all sides, whether it's yes or no. And we need to be aware of the fact that the world will be watching us, and they will expect what has been to date one of the world's most successful democratic states to negotiate these difficulties, with great determination to make a new structure stable and ensure it would work. And this, there will be challenges in an independent Scotland initially. Probably the prospects in the medium and longer term are stronger. But I think you could say the same for the rest of the UK. Our challenges will come very early because that entity will be obviously more fragile than the current union. But I think with generous hearts, we could construct an effective and stable state. But it will require great flexibility and purpose. And I think all the issues we've been discussing about how presumably Wales would be somewhat more autonomous than it would be otherwise, or at least more quickly would be, if it were in a state with England and Northern Ireland, because you'd want to balance the influence of England a bit, and you'd probably need more thoroughgoing reform of the House of Lords to reflect the territorial imbalance. Now, how will the people of England, feel about that? There are obviously difficult questions to be faced, but I think, when we're talking about how will the Scottish vote affect the rest of the UK, we should also think about how it's going to affect the rest of the world, because if a liberal multinational state cannot survive in Britain, you do ask yourselves when on earth it will survive. So at the very least, we should construct a new post-union framework that is as effective as possible, and I think that will require England to be very generous to Wales and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland obviously will encourage England to be, I think, very statesmanlike, because you don't really, well, you shudder if you think of the alternatives if things get very unstable in Northern Ireland. So I think probably a good deal would be available to Wales. But then, I think it would be important in these islands, and I would include the Republic of Ireland in that, to see some form of British version of the EU, almost some form of loose confederation that could offer, a way that if a state no longer works in an old centralized way, then there's still a way for neighbours to cooperate on common political objectives. Absolutely. And I think if we want to send a liberal message to the world, and remember, many parts of the world have much less political stability than we do, and yet still have, contested questions in terms of statehood and the national aspirations, and there are many national communities that don't get the cultural recognition that at least we've traditionally have had always in the UK. So there could be a lot of instability in India, China, all sorts of places. So I do think we owe it to the world because we are seen as one of the foundational democracies in the world. To think of others and to be generous and construct stable alternatives and think flexibly. I didn't think we'd be in this position this week where they really, it's on a knife edge. But whatever happens, we've just got to do a job of work and realize it's not our own futures that are at stake here, but really international politics and organisation will change fundamentally if there's Scottish secession.
Thank you very much, David. Vaughan Gething, what are the dangers for Wales of a yes vote, and what are the dangers for Wales of a no vote?
Look, there are always risks in terms of the future. And it goes back to the continued point you make around what do we want for the union? What sort of future do we want? Whether it's a union without Scotland or a union with Scotland. And that's why I keep going back to this point of having a sensible and mature conversation. If we're going to talk about needs-based funding, I think we've got a lot to gain from engaging with English regions in that conversation, whether that's a union with or without Scotland, because I think we'll find lots of allies in lots of parts of England. I say that someone who lived in England for a long time, and I agree with David and disagree with Clay on the point about whether there's an appetite for regional devolution in England. I think it's a developing concept. People are recognising there could be much to gain. I was in Cornwall not very long ago, and there certainly is an identity in the Southwest, and I think that in the change context that all of us are going through, you may well find a rather different engagement with the question of the sharing of powers and where power should lie. And I think from Wales's point of view, what we don't want, that has been a feature in Scottish politics, and certainly come out now, is a rather more ugly and unpleasant side, where depending on which part of the debates you're on, you get to demonise in the most unpleasant terms people who disagree with you. And I think Ellen Jones ought to reconsider her article today's Wales on talks about a betrayal because of the position that Carwyn Jones took on the Scottish referendum. I think that is the sort of conversation we shouldn't have. We should have a rather more sensible conversation. What do we want? And where does that take us with the people that we represent? And I go to the point I made earlier, this is a fascinating conversation. It's a really important one around the share of power, where it should be, who exercises it, but ultimately the people have to decide. And at this point in time, I still think most of our constituents in
Hey, thanks very much, Vaughan. Okay, thanks, Vaughan. Eluned Parrott, dangers for Wales from a yes vote, dangers for Wales from a no vote?
I think whatever subject you're looking at a mixture of opportunities and threats. If you're doing a market analysis, you'd look at the best factors: political, economic, social, and technological. Certainly, political and economic are very significant factors here, but there are some significant social factors too. In terms of the politics, the opportunity is that we've had an opportunity to talk about new ways of reimagining the union. So that is an opportunity that I think we should make the most of in the future. However, the threat is very much that actually, whichever way the vote goes, there will be potentially some unionist, unreconstructed, shall we say, unionist politicians who might say, well, actually, this is the danger of devolution and we must put a brake on it. So we've got to be very, very careful that in Wales we're speaking with a very clear voice, that we're putting forward a very cohesive argument for what the future for Wales ought to look like within the union as it stands or as it becomes following a yes vote. In terms of the economic arguments, it's the economic risks that have frightened me the most about potential independence for Scotland. You can make independent states work, but there is an economic price to pay, and it's an economic price that not only Scotland will pay, it's an economic price that the rest of the UK will pay as well, and particularly the issues around currency and what Scotland will use for money have really, really frightening potential risks. You could not, for example, a Scottish Treasury, if there were such a thing, could not have bailed out RBS. It could not have done it. The UK could only just do it as a whole, and we are one of the 10 largest economies in the world as a whole at the moment. Banks will be frightened to remain in a country that has no sovereign currency and no formalised currency union. These are very, very dangerous things in terms of economic risk, and we saw £5 billion wiped off the value of companies with what they saw as high exposure to Scotland on the day after the poll came out and suggested that it was a neck-and-neck race. So there are economic risks that are a reality. That doesn't mean to say that they would definitely happen. That's not to say that it would definitely happen that all of the banks would flee from Scotland, that capital would flee from the UK as a whole. But those are very significant risks, and they're risks for all of us as partners in the United Kingdom.
Thanks very much, Eluned. Clay, dangers for Wales, whatever the result of the referendum?
I think on a yes vote, there's a potential for the Welsh voice and the Northern Irish voice, in that sense, to be squeezed in Westminster. I think there is the potential danger for the English part of UK Parliament or it might be an English Parliament at that point, to have enough of the constitutional debate and wanting to move on and debate real issues, especially with a general election coming up in May next year. I think there is a real danger for Wales in that sense. If there's a no vote, again, I think there's a potential danger for Wales to be left behind, that taking in the form of further asymmetry of the union. We've already seen quite extensive proposals being put forward by the Conservatives, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats for further devolution in Scotland in the event of a no vote. We know that the Labour Party in Wales, Owen Smith, Shadow Secretary of State, has committed to implementing their proposals, Labour proposals for Scotland to Wales. But again, will that be with a referendum? Who knows? So, you know, there are real dangers of Wales in both a yes and a no vote. And I think, you know, we've only got to look at the moment. Wales needs a stronger clout within these conversations and within these discussions. That isn't happening at the moment. The UK media aren't really picking up on Wales at the moment. We've seen a couple of pieces, but nothing extensive. And we need to ensure that Wales' voice is at the table, whatever the discussions in a post-yes or a post-no vote, to ensure that that voice is carried through and that Wales gets the best deal out of this.
Thanks very much, Clay. Now, time is pressing, and we're going to draw this to a close. But before we do, I'm going to spring on all the panel members the question, what is their prediction for Thursday's referendum in Scotland? David, Melding.
How kind to start with me. I still think it will be a no vote. But when all this started, a lot of people, including myself, said Alex Salmond would do well to get a 40% vote in favour. Anything in the low 40s would be really an exceptionally good result for yes. It looks as if it's going to be much closer than that even. But I still think the vote will be no, but it will require great statecraft to regenerate the union after such a close result. Thanks,
David. David Williamson.
Goodness, this brings back memories of trying to predict what would happen with the Rainbow Coalition negotiations. I think these 3 days, I think, have a lot can change. A few weeks ago, I had this two numbers in my head of 53, 47 to no. However, those undecided voters, there is just so much emotion in this debate. There are galvanizing factors which are not present in normal party political elections. It is in the air.
Thanks. Elyned.
I'm going to go for a relatively tight no. I think that people who are undecided at this point in time, who haven't been won over by the lofty rhetoric and the promise of a green and pleasant land in the future, I think that those people are people who have nagging anxieties about what the reality of Scottish independence means and what the unanswered questions might mean for them as well. I think, and that will swing it just about into a no camp.
Graham Henry.
I'm going to sit in the fence a wee bit in that I have a number that it would be 52-48 for no, but with the caveat that with such a high registration rate, I think it's at 97%, that kind of throws it into chaos, which means that a prediction is very difficult. And you have to think that if a lot of people that have never voted before, which you imagine is a big proportion of that 97%, that they would be doing so to do the most radical option. So if that is the case, that a lot of people that haven't ever voted before are voting for the first time in order to vote yes and do the most radical thing, that may take yes over the line. But I still would probably err on a very close no.
Okay, Reen.
6 months ago, it was a fairly comfortable no. 3 months ago, it was still going to be a no. Now, clearly, it can be a yes. So we'll think we can all agree on that. Having been up in Scotland a couple of times over the past few months, and having seen the momentum and the flow of opinion, where opinion changes, going only in one direction, that is from no to yes, I think it not only can be a yes, but that it will be a yes, especially taking into consideration the high percentage of people who have registered to vote. I really get the feeling that many of those who are registering for the first time in a long time or for the first time ever are doing so because they want to go for yes. I'm not convinced that they're being reached by the opinion pollsters, incidentally. No real evidence for that, but I just don't get a sense of that. So I think yes, and then Wales is in play.
Thank you. Vaughan.
Well, I think it's really difficult from a very distant point of view to forecast what will happen in the election, and any of us that have been to Scotland are only really seeing our side because of who we're with. It's really close to call, and I wouldn't put my nose one way or another. Obviously, I hope for no votes, and we'll all have to wait and see. And because there are so many, such a big chunk of undecided, we really don't know what those who haven't voted ever or for a long time will do. I think it's folly to try and say I predict a definitive outcome. Whatever happens, though, the future of Britain will change fundamentally in the aftermath of Thursday's vote.
Thank you very much. And Clay?
I think you're a very brave person to put a definitive answer on what the referendum outcome is going to be. I think the polls are too tight to call it either way, actually. But I think there's a couple of things to point out. I think it's quite hard for the pollsters maybe at the moment to pick up these new registered voters within their kind of their weighting methodology for their polls. But I think more importantly, what we've seen in Scotland is a kind of reinvigoration and a reawakening of political debate. Political debates are taking place not just in the back of a taxi, but they're taking place in coffee shops, in town halls and village halls on the front, where they're being packed out with people wanting to debate a yes or a no vote. So I think one of the big winners out of this referendum is the reinvigoration of political debate in Scotland. But I think it's going to be too close to call, and I wouldn't want to put my money on it. But I think I will make a bet on turnout. I think turnout will be over 80%.
Thank you very much indeed, Clay. Well, that draws us to a conclusion. I'd like to thank all of the members of the panel for their very thoughtful contributions, which I think have added greatly to an understanding of what's going on in Scotland and its implications for Wales. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's watched. And in fact, there will be a recording of the Hangout available on Wales Online's Google Plus account. So there is the opportunity for people to catch up with what's been said today. And of course, I should conclude by saying that you can follow all the news as it breaks about the Scottish referendum on Wales Online. So thank you very much to everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right, we're up there. Thanks everyone, that's brilliant.
Great. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
If you've got any
Cheers, bye.
you want to send, then email me, that'll be brilliant. Thanks.